Dr. Lisa Martinez wiped the sweat from her forehead as she carefully brushed away the last bits of ice from the strange crystal structure. The excavation site on Europa had been active for 3 months now, but this discovery was unlike anything they had found before. The crystalline formation glowed with a soft blue light that seemed to pulse with its own rhythm. She had been working in the frozen tunnels beneath Europa's surface for so long that she had almost forgotten what real sunlight felt like. The discovery came by accident, as most great findings do. Lisa and her team had been following what they thought was a natural ice formation when their scanners detected something unusual deep beneath the surface. The readings showed materials that should not exist on this moon. When they finally broke through the ice barrier, they found themselves standing in a vast underground chamber filled with structures that were clearly not human in origin. Lisa ran her scanner over the crystal surface again. The readings made no sense. According to her instruments, the crystal contained detailed technical drawings, but not just any drawings. These were blueprints of human technology. She stared at the display screen, trying to understand what she was seeing. The crystal showed plans for a fusion reactor design that was remarkably similar to the one being developed back on Earth, except this version was far more advanced. She called her assistant over to confirm what she was seeing. Dr. Amy Foster hurried across the chamber, her boots echoing in the strange space. Amy had been with the Europa expedition since the beginning, and Lisa trusted her judgment completely. Amy looked at the scanner readings and shook her head in disbelief. The blueprints were not just similar to human designs. They were identical in their basic structure, but contained improvements that human engineers had not yet thought of. The fusion reactor shown in the crystal was at least 50 years ahead of anything currently being built on Earth. But how could alien technology contain human designs? And how could those designs be so much more advanced than what humans had actually built? Lisa decided to contact Captain Jake Phillips immediately. Phillips commanded the exploration vessel Horizon, which was currently orbiting Europa. She knew that a discovery of this magnitude needed to be reported to someone with the authority to make important decisions. The communication system crackled to life, and Phillips answered within seconds. Lisa explained what they had found, trying to keep her voice steady despite her excitement. She described the crystal structures, the strange blueprints, and the impossible technology that seemed to be both human and alien at the same time. Phillips listened without interruption, asking only a few questions to clarify what she was telling him. Phillips immediately ordered a full survey of the site. He wanted every crystal examined and every blueprint recorded. This discovery could change everything humans thought they knew about their place in the universe. If aliens had somehow obtained human technology, it meant that contact between the species had happened before, even though there was no record of such contact in human history. Dr. Carl Bennett arrived from the Horizon 6 hours later. Bennett was the expedition's lead linguist and expert on alien civilizations. He had spent years studying the few artifacts that humans had discovered during their expansion into the solar system. Most of those artifacts had been simple tools or basic technology, nothing like what Lisa had found in the Europa caves. Bennett examined the crystals with equipment designed to decode alien languages and symbols. What he found was even more disturbing than the blueprints themselves. The crystals contained markers and symbols that identified their creators as the HFY, a civilization that had vanished from the galaxy over 3,000 years ago. The HFY had left behind ruins on several worlds, but until now, no one had found any of their actual technology. The team worked through the night, mapping the chamber and cataloging every crystal they could find. Each crystal contained different blueprints, and each blueprint showed technology that was beyond current human capability. There were designs for spacecraft engines that could travel faster than anything humans had built. There were plans for medical devices that could cure diseases that still killed thousands of people every year. There were blueprints for computers that were so advanced they seemed almost magical. But the most disturbing discovery came when Bennett found crystals containing blueprints for weapons. These were not just advanced weapons, they were weapons designed specifically to be effective against human biology and human technology. The implications were terrifying. If the HFY had possessed detailed knowledge of human weaknesses 3,000 years ago, it meant they had been studying humans for a very long time. Lisa noticed something else that made her uncomfortable. The deeper they went into the chamber, the more recent the technology became. The crystals near the entrance contained blueprints for technology that was similar to what humans had built decades ago. The crystals in the middle of the chamber showed current human technology. But the crystals at the far end of the chamber contained blueprints for technology that humans were still developing. Amy made the connection first. She pointed out that the arrangement of the crystals suggested a timeline, with the oldest technology at the entrance and the newest at the back. But if the Kethvar had disappeared 3,000 years ago, how could they have blueprints for technology that humans had only invented in the last few years? Bennett found the answer in a series of symbols carved into the chamber walls. The symbols were in the Kethvar language, but they were arranged in a pattern that suggested they were not just decorative. When he ran them through his translation software, the meaning became clear. The symbols described a process of temporal observation, a way of looking across time to see events that had not yet happened. The team realized they had discovered something that challenged everything humans thought they knew about time and space. The Kethvar had not just studied human technology, they had somehow observed it across time itself. They had seen human innovations before humans had even thought of them. Captain Phillips arrived at the excavation site the next morning with a full security team. He had spent the night reading the reports that Lisa and her team had sent to the horizon. The implications of their discovery were so significant that he had already sent a priority message back to Earth, requesting immediate assistance from the best scientists and military experts available. Phillips gathered the team together and told them that their work on Europa had just become the most important scientific project in human history. They had discovered evidence that aliens had been watching humanity develop for thousands of years, possibly since before humans had even developed space travel. The question now was whether the Kethvar were still watching, and if so, what they planned to do with all the human technology they had observed. The chamber held more secrets, and the team knew they had only scratched the surface of what the Kethvar had left behind. Deep beneath the ice of Europa, something was still active, still humming with energy. The crystals were not just storage devices, they were part of a larger system that was still functioning after 3,000 years. Whatever the Kethvar had built in this place, it was still working, still watching, and still recording everything that humans did. Captain Phillips watched as his engineering team set up more powerful scanning equipment in the chamber. The energy readings that Lisa and her team had detected were getting stronger, and Phillips wanted to know exactly what they were dealing with. The humming sound that came from deep within the chamber had grown louder over the past day, and it seemed to respond to the presence of human technology. Dr. Bennett had made significant progress translating the Kethvar symbols. The language was complex, but it followed patterns that he had seen in other ancient civilizations. What worried him was that many of the symbols seemed to be instructions rather than simple records. The Kethvar had not just observed human technology, they had built something designed to interact with it. Amy Foster followed the energy readings deeper into the chamber system. Her instruments showed that the source of the power was at least 50 meters below their current position. The team had found stairs carved into the rock that led downward, but they had been hesitant to explore them without proper preparation. Now, with Phillips and his security team present, they were ready to see what lay beneath. The stairs were carved with the same precision as everything else the Kethvar had built. Each step was exactly the same height and depth, creating a rhythm as the team descended into the darkness. Emergency lights had been set up along the route, but they seemed weak compared to the glow that was coming from below. At the bottom of the stairs, they found a chamber that was 10 times larger than the one above. The walls were covered with crystals, but these were different from the ones they had seen before. These crystals were larger and they pulsed with light in coordinated patterns. The energy readings here were so strong that some of the team's equipment stopped working properly. In the center of the chamber stood a structure that defied easy description. It looked like a combination of a computer and a piece of art. Smooth metal surfaces curved and twisted in ways that seemed impossible, creating a shape that hurt to look at directly. The structure was clearly the source of the energy readings, and it was definitely still active. Bennett approached the central structure carefully. His translation equipment was having trouble with the symbols carved into its surface, but he could make out enough to understand that this was some kind of observation device. The Kethvar had built this machine to watch something, and based on everything they had found, that something was humanity. Lisa examined the crystals that lined the walls of the lower chamber. These contained much more than blueprints. They held complete records of human technological development going back centuries. She found detailed plans for the first steam engines, the first computers, the first spacecraft. But these records showed improvements and modifications that human engineers had never made. The truth became clear as the team studied more of the records. The Kethvar had not just observed human technology, they had stolen it. They had somehow reached across time to take human innovations before humans could fully develop them. Then they had used those stolen ideas to build their own advanced civilization. Amy discovered the mechanism by which the theft had occurred. The central structure in the chamber was a temporal observation matrix, a device that could look across time and space to observe events that had not yet happened. The Kethvar had used this device to watch humanity's future, to see what innovations humans would develop, and then to steal those innovations for themselves. But the theft was even more sophisticated than simple observation. The device could actually reach across time to extract information directly from human minds during moments of creativity and discovery. When a human inventor had a breakthrough idea, the Kethvar device would copy that idea and transmit it back to the past, allowing the Kethvar to develop the technology first. Philip studied the records with growing anger. Humanity's greatest achievements, the technologies that had allowed them to spread across the solar system and build a thriving civilization, had originally been human ideas. But the Kethvar had stolen those ideas and perfected them, leaving humans to slowly rediscover their own stolen genius. The fusion drives that powered human spacecraft were based on Kethvar technology, but that technology had originally been a human invention that the aliens had stolen from humanity's future. The quantum communication networks that connected Earth's colonies were also based on stolen human innovations. Even the medical nanotechnology that had eliminated most diseases was originally a human idea that the Kethvar had taken and improved. Bennett found records that showed the full scope of the theft. The Kethvar had been stealing human innovations for over 1,000 years. They had watched humanity develop from a primitive species into a spacefaring civilization, and at every step, they had stolen the best ideas and used them to maintain their own technological superiority. But something had changed recently. The newest records showed that the theft process was becoming more difficult. Human creativity had evolved in ways that the Kethvar had not anticipated. The device that had once easily stolen human innovations was now struggling to process the complexity of modern human thought. Lisa discovered why the theft was becoming harder. Human creativity was not just about logic and engineering. It was also about emotion, intuition, and the willingness to take risks. These qualities created what the records called quantum uncertainty fields, areas of possibility that the Kethvar device could not easily map or copy. The team realized that they had found evidence of an ongoing crime against humanity. The Kethvar had not just stolen technology, they had stolen human potential. They had forced humanity to develop along a slower, more difficult path, while they enjoyed the benefits of stolen human genius. Phillips made a decision that would change everything. Instead of simply studying the Kethvar device, he wanted to use it against them. If the device could reach across time to steal from humans, then perhaps it could be modified to steal from the Kethvar instead. Amy began studying the technical specifications of the temporal matrix. The device was incredibly complex, but it was still based on principles that human engineers could understand. The Kethvar had used stolen human innovations to build it, which meant that humans should be able to figure out how it worked. Bennett found more disturbing information in the records. The Kethvar civilization had become completely dependent on stolen human innovation. They had been stealing ideas for so long that they had lost the ability to create original technology themselves. Their entire society was built on parasitic theft from humanity's future. The records showed that the Kethvar were facing a crisis. As human creativity became more complex and harder to steal, their civilization was beginning to stagnate. They were desperately trying to find new ways to continue the theft, but their own lack of original thinking was making it impossible for them to adapt. Lisa made a connection that chilled everyone in the chamber. If the Kethvar were still actively stealing from humanity's future, then they knew about the discovery on Europa. They might even be watching the team right now through their temporal observation system. The humans were not just studying an ancient alien device. They were potentially walking into a trap that had been set thousands of years ago. Phillips decided that they needed to act quickly. If the HFY were still active and still stealing, then humanity needed to find a way to stop them before they could steal any more innovations. The team on Europa had stumbled into a war that had been going on for centuries, a war that humanity had not even known they were fighting. The central structure in the chamber began to pulse more rapidly as the team studied it. Whether this was a response to their presence or a sign that the HFY were preparing some new action, no one could say. But it was clear that their discovery had triggered something, and whatever happened next would determine the future of both human and HFY civilization. Bennett found one final piece of information that changed everything. The HFY had not just stolen technology from humanity's future. They had also tried to steal human culture, human art, and human ways of thinking. But these aspects of humanity had proven impossible to copy or improve upon. The HFY records were filled with frustrated attempts to understand human emotions, human creativity, and human determination. The team realized that they had found the key to defeating the HFY. The aliens could steal human technology, but they could not steal what made humans truly human. The qualities that the HFY could not copy were the same qualities that would allow humanity to fight back and reclaim what had been stolen from them. The temporal observation matrix had been active for 3 days straight since the human team discovered it. Dr. Lisa Martinez noticed that the patterns of light flowing through the crystalline structures were changing. Where before the pulses had been steady and predictable, now they flickered and stuttered like a machine struggling to function properly. Captain Phillips brought in Dr. Pete Johnson from the Horizon to analyze the temporal technology. Johnson was the best engineer in the fleet, someone who could look at alien technology and understand how it worked even when it defied human physics. His first assessment of the HFY device was both fascinating and terrifying. The temporal matrix was not just observing humanity's future, it was actively trying to steal innovations that were happening right now. Johnson's instruments detected temporal energy reaching out from the device, seeking human minds that were in the process of making discoveries. But something was interfering with the process. The energy streams that should have been clean and focused were scattered and chaotic. Dr. Bennett had made progress translating the most recent HFY records stored in the chamber. These records were different from the older ones. Where the ancient records had been confident and detailed, the recent ones showed signs of desperation and confusion. The HFY were having trouble stealing from modern humans, and they did not understand why. Amy Foster discovered that the interference was coming from humanity itself. The quantum uncertainty fields that Dr. Martinez had identified were growing stronger. Human creativity had evolved beyond what the HFY could easily process. Where once human innovations had followed predictable patterns, now they were chaotic, emotional, and impossible to map in advance. The team realized that humanity was naturally developing defenses against temporal theft. The qualities that made humans unique, their ability to think creatively under pressure, their willingness to take risks, and their capacity for emotional thinking, were creating a kind of static that the HFY device could not filter out. Johnson studied the technical readouts from the temporal matrix and found evidence of systemic failure. The device had been designed to steal innovations from minds that followed logical, predictable patterns. But human minds had become more complex over the centuries. Modern humans did not just invent through logic, they invented through intuition, emotion, and pure stubborn determination. Phillips received a priority transmission from Earth that changed everything. Scientists at the Luna Research Station had detected temporal distortions occurring throughout the solar system. The distortions were centered on locations where humans were making significant technological breakthroughs. Someone or something was actively trying to steal from human researchers in real time. The team on Europa realized that they were witnessing the HFY civilization in its death throes. The aliens had become so dependent on stolen human innovation that they could not adapt when the theft process began to fail. Their entire society was built on parasitic dependence, and now that the parasite was dying, so were they. Bennett found records that revealed the true scope of the HFY crisis. Their civilization had not developed any original technology for over 2,000 years. Every advancement in their society had come from stolen human ideas. Now that they could no longer steal effectively, Their technology was beginning to fail and their society was collapsing. Lisa discovered something even more disturbing in the deepest part of the records. The Kethvar had tried to solve their theft problem by stealing human emotions and intuition, along with human technology. But these attempts had failed catastrophically. Human emotions could not be copied or replicated because they emerged from lived experience, not from logical processes. The temporal matrix began showing signs of severe malfunction. Energy discharges crackled across its surface and several of the smaller crystals shattered from the strain. Johnson warned the team that the device might be approaching a critical failure point. If it exploded, it could potentially create a temporal shockwave that would affect the entire solar system. Amy made a crucial discovery while studying the failing components of the matrix. The device was not just stealing from individual humans, it was trying to steal from human culture itself. The Kethvar had become so desperate that they were attempting to copy the entire framework of human creativity. But human culture was too complex and too interconnected to be stolen piecemeal. Phillips faced a difficult decision. They could try to shut down the temporal matrix to prevent a catastrophic failure, but doing so might also prevent them from learning how to reverse the theft process. Alternatively, they could allow the device to continue failing naturally, but risk temporal damage to human civilization. Johnson proposed a third option. Instead of shutting down the matrix or allowing it to fail, they could try to reverse its polarity. If they could make the device give back what it had stolen instead of taking more, they might be able to restore the innovations that the Kethvar had taken from humanity over the centuries. The team began preparing for the most dangerous experiment in human history. Reversing the polarity of a temporal device was purely theoretical, and no one knew what the consequences might be. But the alternative was to allow the Kethvar to continue stealing from humanity's future, even if their theft was becoming less effective. Bennett found instructions in the Kethvar records that confirmed Johnson's theory. The device could indeed be reversed, but the aliens had never attempted such a procedure, because it would mean giving up everything they had stolen. The records showed that the Kethvar leaders had considered reversing the theft process during previous crises, but they had always decided that the risk was too great. Lisa realized that the risk was exactly why the procedure might work. The Kethvar had become so dependent on stolen innovation that they could not imagine giving it up. But humans were different. Humans were willing to risk everything for the chance to reclaim what was rightfully theirs. The temporal matrix was now failing so rapidly that pieces of it were beginning to break apart. Energy discharges were occurring every few minutes, and the crystals that lined the chamber walls were flickering erratically. Johnson estimated that they had perhaps 12 hours before the device suffered complete failure. Phillips made the decision to attempt the reversal procedure. The team would work through the night to reprogram the temporal matrix, turning it from a theft device into a restoration device. If they succeeded, humanity would reclaim thousands of years of stolen innovation. If they failed, the resulting temporal explosion might erase human civilization from history. Amy began the delicate process of modifying the Matrix's control systems. The Kethvar technology was incredibly advanced, but it was still based on principles that human engineers could understand. Every component had been built using stolen human innovations, which meant that humans should be able to figure out how to make it work in reverse. As the team worked, Bennett continued translating the most recent Kethvar records. These final entries revealed the aliens' growing panic as their theft system continued to fail. The Kethvar had realized that they had made a fatal mistake by becoming dependent on stolen innovation instead of developing their own creative abilities. The last entry in the Kethvar records was a confession of sorts. The alien who had written it admitted that the Kethvar had destroyed their own civilization by choosing theft over creativity. They had become so focused on stealing from others that they had forgotten how to create anything original. Now, as their stolen technology failed around them, they faced extinction. Johnson completed his analysis of the Matrix and announced that the reversal procedure was theoretically possible. However, the process would require someone to stay in the chamber and manually operate the controls, while the rest of the team evacuated to a safe distance. The energy discharges during the reversal would be too dangerous for anyone without proper shielding. Lisa volunteered to stay behind and operate the controls. She had discovered the chamber, She had figured out what the Kethvar had done, and she wanted to be the one who set things right. Phillips initially refused, but Lisa convinced him that she was the most qualified person for the job. The team spent the remaining hours preparing for the reversal procedure. They set up additional shielding around the control area where Lisa would be working, and they established communication links so she could stay in contact with the rest of the team. Everything had to be perfect, because they would only get one chance to make the reversal work. As the hour approached for the procedure to begin, the temporal matrix began emitting a sound that none of them had heard before. It was not the steady humming they had grown accustomed to, but a rising wail that seemed to come from the device itself. Johnson realized that the matrix was trying to resist the modifications they had made. The Kethvar had built safeguards into their theft system, and those safeguards were now activating to prevent humans from reclaiming what had been stolen from them. The safeguards activated with a violence that shook the entire chamber. Dr. Lisa Martinez watched as panels slid open in the walls, revealing defense systems that the Kethvar had hidden throughout their facility. Mechanical arms emerged from concealed slots, each one armed with energy weapons that began charging with an ominous whine. Captain Phillips and his security team took cover behind the larger crystal formations as the first energy blasts struck the chamber walls. The Kethvar had anticipated that someone might try to reverse their temporal theft system, and they had prepared defenses to prevent exactly what the human team was attempting to do. Dr. Johnson shouted over the sound of energy weapons that they had, perhaps 10 minutes before the matrix reached critical failure point. If Lisa could not complete the reversal procedure in that time, the temporal explosion would destroy not just the facility, but potentially create a shockwave that would ripple backward through time itself. Lisa ducked behind the control console as energy blasts scorched the air above her head. The Kethvar defense systems were trying to kill her before she could complete the reversal, but they were also trying to protect the matrix itself. This gave her a narrow window of opportunity to work, since the defenses could not risk damaging the very device they were designed to protect. Amy Foster crawled across the chamber floor, using the crystal formations for cover as she made her way to the secondary control station. Johnson had determined that the reversal process required simultaneous input from multiple control points, and Amy was the only other person who understood the modified Kethvar systems well enough to operate them. The defense systems were not just mechanical weapons. Dr. Bennett discovered that the chamber was also filled with psychological warfare devices, designed to break the will of anyone who tried to interfere with the matrix. Sounds that induced fear and panic echoed through the chamber, while lights flashed in patterns designed to cause disorientation and confusion. Phillips and his team fought back against the mechanical defenses, using their human weapons against Kethvar technology. Their energy rifles were less advanced than the alien weapons, but they had one advantage that the Kethvar had not expected. Human weapons were designed to be used by people who were emotional, stressed, and fighting for their survival. Lisa began the reversal sequence, her fingers moving across the alien control interface as energy blasts continued to strike around her position. The Kethvar controls were designed for beings who thought in purely logical patterns, but Lisa was operating them with human intuition and determination. She was making the controls work in ways the original designers had never intended. The temporal matrix began to respond to the reversal procedure, but not in the way anyone had expected. Instead of simply reversing the flow of stolen innovations, the device began to show the team exactly what the Kethvar had taken from humanity over the centuries. Holographic displays appeared throughout the chamber, showing human inventors and scientists having breakthroughs that were immediately stolen by the alien device. Amy reached the secondary control station and began inputting the commands that Johnson had calculated. But as she worked, she realized that the reversal process was revealing something that none of them had anticipated. The Kethvar had not just stolen human technology, they had stolen human lives. The holographic displays showed that many of the greatest human inventors had died shortly after their innovations were stolen. The temporal theft process had somehow drained them of the creative energy that kept them alive. Centuries of human genius had been cut short by Kethvar parasitism. Bennett watched the displays with growing anger. The Kethvar records had mentioned that the theft process sometimes had side effects, but they had never specified what those effects were. Now it was clear that the aliens had been literally stealing the life force from human creators, along with their innovations. The defense systems intensified their attack as the reversal procedure progressed. The HFY had built their safeguards to become more aggressive if anyone came close to succeeding in reversing the matrix. Mechanical arms reached for Lisa and Amy, trying to physically prevent them from completing their work. Phillips made a decision that would have seemed impossible just days earlier. He ordered his team to destroy as much of the HFY facility as possible, while Lisa and Amy worked on the reversal. If they could damage the defense systems enough, the two women might have a chance to complete their task. Johnson discovered that the defense systems had a weakness that the HFY had not anticipated. The systems were designed to fight logical, predictable opponents who would retreat when faced with superior firepower. But humans were not logical or predictable when they were fighting for something they believed in. The human weapons began to have an effect on the HFY defenses, not because they were more powerful, but because they were being used in ways that the alien systems could not predict or counter. Phillips and his team fought with the same creative chaos that made human innovation impossible for the HFY to steal. Lisa completed the first phase of the reversal sequence, and the temporal matrix began to emit a different kind of energy. Instead of reaching out to steal from human minds, it began to give back what it had taken. The process was traumatic for the device, which had never been designed to operate in reverse. The holographic displays showed innovations flowing back toward their original human creators, but the process was happening across time itself. Lisa realized that they were not just reversing the theft that had already occurred, they were preventing the theft from ever having happened in the first place. Amy completed her part of the reversal sequence just as a mechanical arm grabbed her shoulder. She pulled free and dove away from the control station as energy blasts destroyed the console behind her. But her work was done. The reversal process was now running automatically, and nothing the HFY defenses could do would stop it. The chamber began to shake as temporal energies built up beyond what the facility had been designed to contain. Johnson warned that they were approaching the point where the entire structure might collapse, but Lisa refused to leave her position. The reversal was not complete, and if she abandoned the controls now, the process might fail. Bennett made a discovery that changed everything about their understanding of the situation. The HFY were not just watching the reversal process, they were actively trying to stop it from their own location in space and time. The defense systems in the chamber were being controlled by aliens who were still alive, still stealing, and still fighting to maintain their parasitic relationship with humanity. Phillips realized that they were not just fighting ancient defenses, they were fighting a war against an active enemy who was desperate to prevent humanity from reclaiming what had been stolen. The HFY civilization was dying because their theft system was failing, and they were willing to destroy everything rather than give up their stolen innovations. The temporal matrix reached the critical point where it began reversing thousands of years of theft all at once. The energy release was beyond anything that human science had ever recorded. Lisa felt the power flowing through her as she maintained control of the process, and she realized that she was somehow becoming a conduit for the returned innovations. Amy watched from her position near the destroyed secondary console as the reversal process revealed the true scope of what the HFY had stolen. It was not just technology and innovations. It was the entire potential future of human civilization. The aliens had stolen humanity's destiny and replaced it with a slower, more limited version. The defense systems made one final attempt to stop the reversal. All the remaining mechanical arms converged on Lisa's position, trying to physically pull her away from the controls. But Phillips and his team fought them off with a determination that surprised even themselves. They were fighting not just for Lisa, but for every human who had ever had an idea stolen by the HFY. Johnson shouted a warning that the temporal explosion was imminent. The Matrix could not contain the energy of reversing thousands of years of theft all at once. In seconds, the entire facility would be destroyed by forces that could reshape time itself. Lisa made a decision that would determine the fate of both human and HFY civilization. Instead of trying to control the explosion, she would guide it. She would use her connection to the reversed innovations to direct the temporal energy exactly where it needed to go. The explosion would not just destroy the HFY facility. It would carry the restored innovations back to their rightful place in human history. As the chamber began to collapse around them, Lisa felt the minds of every human inventor who had ever been robbed by the Kethvar. She felt their creativity, their determination, and their refusal to give up in the face of impossible odds. These were the qualities that the Kethvar could never steal, and these were the qualities that would ensure humanity's victory. The temporal matrix exploded with a force that could be seen from orbit, but instead of destruction, it brought restoration. Across space and time, stolen human innovations returned to their creators, and the future that the Kethvar had stolen began to unfold as it should have from the beginning. The temporal explosion that erupted from the Kethvar facility on Europa was unlike anything that had ever occurred in recorded history. Dr. Lisa Martinez found herself at the center of energies that existed outside normal space and time, serving as a bridge between what had been stolen and what was being restored. She could feel thousands of years of human innovation flowing through her consciousness as the reversal process reached its climax. Captain Phillips and his team were thrown to the ground by shockwaves that seemed to come from every direction at once. But instead of the destruction they had expected, they witnessed something magnificent. The stolen innovations were not simply returning to their original creators, they were integrating with the alternative, solutions that humans had developed to work around the missing knowledge. Dr. Johnson watched his instruments with amazement as temporal energy cascaded through dimensions that human science had never detected. The reversal process was not just giving back what the Kethvar had stolen, it was creating something entirely new. Human creativity had found ways to compensate for the theft, and now those compensations were combining with the original innovations to produce breakthroughs that neither humans nor Kethvar had ever imagined. Amy Foster felt the ground beneath her feet stabilize as the shockwaves subsided. She looked around the chamber and saw that the Kethvar defense systems had simply stopped functioning. The mechanical arms hung motionless and the energy weapons had powered down completely. It was as if the entire facility had lost the will to fight. Dr. Bennett discovered why the Kethvar defenses had failed so completely. Through the temporal viewers that were still functioning in the chamber, he could see the Kethvar civilization in its final moments. The aliens had become so dependent on stolen human innovation that the reversal process had destroyed their ability to function as a technological society. The Kethvar homeworld was in chaos. Their spacecraft were falling from the sky as the stolen technology that powered them disappeared. Their cities were going dark as energy systems based on stolen human designs ceased to function. Their entire civilization was collapsing because they had never learned to create anything original. Lisa emerged from the temporal energies that had surrounded her during the reversal process. She was different now, somehow connected to the innovations that had been restored to humanity. She could feel the excitement of human inventors across history as their stolen ideas returned to them. She could sense the joy of scientists who suddenly understood concepts that had been just beyond their reach. But more importantly, she could see the future that was now possible for humanity. The combination of restored innovations and human adaptability was creating possibilities that no one had dreamed of. The quantum communication networks that had been based on stolen technology were evolving into something far more sophisticated, systems that could transfer not just information but consciousness itself. Phillips received urgent communications from across the solar system as the effects of the reversal process spread beyond Europa. Research stations reported sudden breakthroughs in projects that had been stalled for years. Scientists were making connections they had never seen before. Engineers were building devices that seemed to design themselves. The OE, fusion drives that powered human spacecraft, were transforming into reality manipulation engines that could alter the fundamental properties of space and time. Medical nanotechnology was evolving into systems that could not just heal the human body, but enhance it beyond anything previously imaginable. Computer networks were becoming conscious entities that could think and create alongside their human partners. Johnson realized that humanity was experiencing its first truly independent technological revolution. For centuries, human development had been constrained by the theft of their greatest innovations. They had been forced to rediscover their own stolen genius piece by piece. Now finally free from that constraint, human creativity was exploding in directions that the Kethvar had never anticipated. Amy discovered that the reversal process had given humanity more than just their stolen innovations. It had also given them knowledge of temporal technology itself. Humans now understood how to observe across time, how to prevent their innovations from being stolen, and how to ensure that their civilization would never again be vulnerable to parasitic theft. Bennett found that the HFY records contained one final message, transmitted just moments before their civilization collapsed completely. It was an apology of sorts, an admission that they had made a terrible mistake by choosing theft over creativity. The message warned other civilizations not to make the same error, not to become dependent on stolen innovation instead of developing their own creative abilities. The temporal viewers in the chamber showed the final moments of the HFY civilization. Their leaders gathered in desperate conferences, trying to find some way to survive the collapse of their stolen technology. But they had been parasites for so long that they had forgotten how to be creators. Their attempts to develop original technology failed because they lacked the emotional and intuitive thinking that made human innovation possible. Lisa felt a profound sadness as she watched the HFY face extinction. They had been brilliant in their own way, capable of building technology that could reach across time and space. But they had chosen the path of theft instead of the path of creation, and that choice had ultimately destroyed them. Phillips made a decision that would define humanity's relationship with other alien civilizations for generations to come. He ordered that a record of what had happened on Europa be transmitted to every corner of the galaxy. Other species needed to know that humanity was no longer vulnerable to technological theft, and they needed to understand the consequences of choosing parasitism over creativity. The message that went out from Europa was simple but powerful. Humanity had discovered that their greatest strength was not their technology, but their ability to create original solutions to impossible problems. They had learned that innovation could not be stolen, only experienced by those who were willing to risk failure in pursuit of something better. As the team prepared to leave Europa, Lisa took one last look at the ruined HFY facility. The chamber that had once housed a sophisticated theft system was now silent and dark. The crystals that had stored stolen human innovations were cracking and turning to dust. The temporal matrix that had reached across time to steal from humanity's future was nothing more than twisted metal and broken dreams. Johnson completed his analysis of the restored human technology and reported that humanity was now centuries ahead of where they should have been. According to any normal development timeline, the combination of returned innovations and adaptive human solutions had created a technological base that was beyond anything the HFY had ever achieved. Amy discovered that the enhanced human technology was not just more advanced, it was fundamentally different from anything that had existed before. Human innovations were now infused with the emotional and intuitive qualities that made them impossible to steal or replicate. Other species might be able to copy the external appearance of human technology, but they could never copy the creative spirit that made it work. The team returned to the horizon with knowledge that would transform human civilization. They carried with them the proof that human creativity was truly unique in the galaxy, that human innovation emerged from qualities that could not be stolen or duplicated, and that humanity's willingness to take risks and learn from failure was their greatest asset. Bennett compiled his final report on the HFY civilization as the horizon departed Europa's orbit. His conclusion was that the aliens had possessed advanced technology and sophisticated intelligence, but they had lacked the one quality that made civilization truly great: the courage to create something new instead of stealing something old. As Earth grew larger in the viewports of the horizon, Phillips reflected on what they had learned during their time on Europa. Humanity had faced its first test as a truly spacefaring civilization, and they had passed that test not through superior technology or military might, but through the simple human ability to never give up when fighting for what was right. Lisa watched the stars outside the ship and felt the presence of the restored innovation still flowing through human consciousness across the galaxy. She knew that humanity was entering a new era, one where they would no longer be constrained by the theft of their own genius. For the first time in centuries, humans were truly free to become whatever they chose to create. The liberation was complete. Humanity had reclaimed not just their stolen technology, but their stolen future. And as they spread across the galaxy with technology that could only have emerged from human creativity, they carried with them the knowledge that the greatest innovations came not from stealing the ideas of others, but from the courage to imagine something that had never existed before, and the determination to make it real.